We're almost ready for the 2025 Stanley Cup Final to begin. Today we're going to preview the Cup Final, take a look at each team, and give you my thoughts and predictions on who is going to win. And that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're going to preview the 2025 Stanley Cup Final between the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers. Going to go over some stats and kind of give you an idea what to expect. And then I'm going to give you my thoughts and predictions on how this is going to go and who is going to take home Lord Stanley this year. So we're going to start here with a bit of a stat rundown on how each team has done in the playoffs so we can kind of compare how these teams have kind of made their way to where they are in the Cup Final, discuss how these teams are a little different compared to this same match last year in the Stanley Cup Final, and then we'll go in a little bit further from there. So let's start first with their records. Of course, they both have won 12 games to get to this point. The Oilers have played one fewer game than Florida. They have a 12-4 record, where Florida's got a 12-5 record. So obviously the Oilers, like I said, played 16 games. Florida's played 17. The main difference is they had a 7-game series against the Maple Leafs. Otherwise, all the other series for these teams have ended in 5 or 6 games. Both the conference finals ended with the same number of games here as well, though they pretty much have the same rest going into the Stanley Cup Final here as well. Edmonton's game was 1 day after Florida, so really not a great deal of difference in that respect. Goals for is pretty even as well. Edmonton scored 65 goals. Florida scored 66 goals. But like I said, remember, Florida's played one more game here. So all in all, when you break it down per game, Edmonton's got a slight advantage that way. Goals against, 39 for Florida, 45 for Edmonton. So again, Florida's played one game different. They do have a slight edge on goals against. So Edmonton scored at a slightly higher pace. Florida's allowed goals at a slightly lower pace. So again, kind of evens things out in a sense. Power play, edge goes to the Oilers. They have a 30% power play so far in these playoffs. Panthers power play has not been terrible though, 23.2. So it's been what you'd call a normal good, whereas the Oilers one has been exceptional. The PK, however, tells a different story. The Panthers' penalty kill has been exceptional, 87.9% in these playoffs, where the Oilers only 66%. That's a huge difference from last year. The Oilers, especially in the last couple of rounds, their penalty killing was tops in the league amongst the playoff teams, and they had an incredible streak there where they didn't allow a power play goal. It was kind of ridiculous. Looking at the goaltending, the main thing I'm concerned about are the goalies. We know they have, each team has 12 wins. Edmonton has played Calvin Pickard a decent amount. Obviously, he got hurt. Skinner comes back in. So they've kind of split the duties so far in these playoffs, where Bobrovsky's been running the course here for the Panthers. So we're going to look at save percentage. And to me, that's the best stat to kind of say, okay, as a team, who's getting more saves and a higher percentage. Edmonton's save percentage with Skinner is 904. Bobrovsky, 912. So, again, edge Florida, which goes in line with the fact they've allowed a few goals against less. But Stuart Skinner has been, it's almost like a tale of two Skinners, if you will, right? The first few games are going to skew that number because he was god-awful. And then they went to Pickard for a while. Pickard's numbers, even though he was getting wins, haven't been as good as what Skinner's put up in the last 2 rounds. So early Skinner was really bad. Early Pickard was okay, good enough to win. But then late Skinner has been exceptional. Where Bobrovsky's been, I would say, anywhere from good to kind of great at times throughout the playoffs. Good enough to win most nights. Couple of losses, you could say he wasn't on the top of his game, but generally speaking, he's been good enough and occasionally great. So really, when you break all that down, is there really a clear-cut answer to say like one team appears to be really better than the other? No, not really. Like I said, one game difference to get where they are. Goals for, pretty even. Goals for, not much difference. One has a power play advantage, the other has a penalty kill advantage. So can the Florida Panthers penalty kill tame down that Oilers power play? Well, you would be led to think, based on these numbers, that if there's a team that can do it, they would be the ones. And then penalty killing wise, can the Oilers penalty killers be good enough to at least, kind of keep that Florida power play at bay? And can each team be disciplined enough that maybe special teams aren't quite as big of a difference, but they generally always are. A team that wins a special teams battle does win the games more often than not. So looking at the breakdown on an individual basis, both teams have 19 players that have scored a goal. The depth on these teams is incredible. Looking at the point leaders, McDavid, 26, Draisaitl, 25, Nugent-Hopkins, 18, Bouchard, 17, Kane and Hyman have 11, Perry has 10, Brown has 8, Henrique has 6. And then they have a bunch with less than that. So obviously the highest scorer on Florida, Barkov, 17. So the top 3 scorers of the Oilers, all higher than the Florida top scorer in Barkov. Not a huge shocker here. But as you go down this list, you've got Bennett with 16, Tkachuk with 16, Verhaeghe with 14, Marchand with 14, Reinhart with 13, Luostarinen with 13, Lundell with 12, Ekblad with 11. So the top guys on the Oilers are higher, whereas the Panthers are a little more balanced. Not a shocker. Hyman's now injured, not in the picture. That is a problem for Edmonton. But they do have the pieces that can step up. Each of these teams, like I said, have produced enough depth in this playoffs to show that when guys need to step up, they have the personnel that are capable of doing that. So all in all, it's kind of a coin toss. A lot of the betting sites have this as 55-45, or even tighter than that. A lot of people think we're going to have a 7-game series again, and we probably will. Wouldn't be shocking at all. These two teams are very evenly matched. Looking at last year, again, the Oilers, are they better defensively now than they were last year? I think that's fair to say, because that was kind of viewed upon, really for quite some time, defense was their weaker point, right? They've always been a high-octane offense for quite some time, but that's gotten better. The Panthers, on the other hand, were a stronger defensive team, and now it seems like they have a better balance in scoring. So I think both teams might actually be better than they were last year. Now, a couple of other key factors that are hard to produce here. I almost think that even though the Oilers have Hyman out of the lineup, they are expected to get Connor Brown back. So the only real player out for Edmonton is going to be Hyman. On the Florida side, it's possible that A.J. Greer may not be in there. He plays a bottom 6 fourth line type of role. A little easier to replace their depth guys, whether it be Jesper Boqvist or one of those guys will step in and probably do just fine. So health-wise, it's kind of you could say advantage Florida in that sense, but I'm not sure that it is, because I think there's enough players on Florida playing hurt, especially Matthew Tkachuk, that I do wonder. Even Reinhart to some degree. I mean, I think they're all banged up, obviously. At this stage, nobody's really healthy. But McDavid and Draisaitl are both healthier than last year for sure, and they've got a little bit more rest here lately. They were both banged up pretty bad going into the final last year. I almost think that's an advantage for Edmonton. But either way, that will play a role. Edmonton has home ice this year. Last year, Florida had it. The game came down to Game 7, and it was a 2-1 game. Having home ice advantage definitely, I think, played a role for the Panthers. So, again, I think that's advantage Edmonton. So, pretty darn close. So, here's a couple of other incredible stats here to take a look at. If you look at, because we don't get a lot of scenarios, at least in recent NHL history, where you've had the same final 2 years in a row. But we have seen this happen, and we've seen it happen with a couple of the other, what I'd call the greats, if you will, including the great one, Wayne Gretzky. His first Stanley Cup final against the New York Islanders. What happens? They lose. Well, what happens next? They go back and they meet the Islanders in the final the next year, and they win. And then they go on a run of multiple cups, and they won a bunch there, right? So again, that's how Gretzky started. Sidney Crosby, another one of the going to go down as one of the all-time greats, probably one of the top 4 or 5 players ever. His first final against Detroit in 08, they lose. It's a heartbreaker. They get all the way to the final, they lose, and then they go back to next year and they win. So is McDavid on the same path as some of the other greats? Well, like his heroes, like Gretzky and Crosby. It sure seems that way. This Oilers team just seems on a mission. And even though this is a very tightly contested series, I wouldn't be shocked if it goes 7 games. Just a couple of the things I think are advantage Edmonton. Like I said, with Connor and Leon being healthier and having home ice. I think that could very well be the difference. Now, another crazy stat, and I got this earlier. Actually, I saw this on the Empty Netters podcast. It's a pretty good show with the Powers brothers. Interesting stat. The Oilers are only the 8th team ever to make the Stanley Cup final after losing their first 2 games in the playoffs. We know they had a bad start against the Kings, and it's been lights out really ever since. Like I said, they've only lost 4 games in the entire playoffs. The first 2 were 2 of those games. So, in your last 14 games, you're 12-2. So, and of course, one of those was an epic collapse against Dallas in Game 1 of the Western Final because of penalty trouble. So again, they should have won that game, but they didn't. So the other 7 teams that have made the final after losing the first 2 games in their playoffs include the 93 Habs and the 92 Penguins, the 02 Red Wings, the 06 Hurricanes, the 2011 Bruins, the 2014 Kings, and the 2018 Washington Capitals. Now, if you're a big hockey buff like me and you know a lot about the history, you've been following along a long time, you probably noticed a trend. Every one of those teams won the Stanley Cup. Now, doesn't mean for sure this is going to happen, but to me, it just feels like the Oilers are just destined to do this. Like, to me, like, it's really... Some people will say it's really hard to bet against Florida. 3rd straight year in the final. They got a Stanley Cup on their resume, and that's true. This Oilers team, and just how much of a mission they've been on after the heartbreaking Game 7 to lose by 1 goal, to get all the way back to where they are after a potentially disastrous start to their playoffs. They just seem to be a little more of the freight train that I think that they're going to take it. So I'm predicting Edmonton wins the Cup. McDavid gets his big prize. McDavid probably gets Conn Smythe Trophy for the 2nd year in a row. You never know, but that's what, if not him, then Leon, one of the 2, but probably Connor. And Canada, as a country, ends their drought with no cups since those 93 Habs. So that's how I think it's going to play out now. To be honest, I've been picking the Oilers. I picked the Oilers to win the Cup last year. I was almost right. I picked the Oilers at the beginning of this year to win the Cup, and I'm not going against them. Now, if I really thought they were in one and just could not do it, I would be honest here and say it. But everything lines up that it's going to be super close, super tight. Things can happen in this series. There could be an injury early on in the series that has a major impact. There's a lot of things that we can't predict that won't show up on a score sheet or that we can't analyze right now to really determine the outcome here. But for right now, with all these things just giving us, statistically, it just feels like it's Edmonton and McDavid's time. So I'm going with them. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'd love to know your predictions and how you think it's going to play out, how many games, etc. And we'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.